What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, June 20th, 2011, and boy, do I hate being right all the time. Did I not say 2, 3 weeks, a month back, that the incumbent politicians can't run on the way they've handled the country? They can't run on the economy. They can't run on the wars. They can't run on their obeisance to Israel. They can't run on the handling of the Gulf oil disaster. Can't run on Fukushima. Can't run on the infrastructure. Can't run on any of this stuff. And I said they're going to manufacture a big issue that they can run on in 2012. And I even said it'll be gay marriage. And here we are, that last news break. Oh, we've got to push a bill through for gay marriage this and gay rights that and gay sensitivity training here. They are so desperate to lure you into thinking, about anything except the quality of your life and your economic situation here. Even Obama is out there, is taking time away from, going out there and laying waste to most of the Middle Eastern world there to basically say that he's going to endorse gay marriage. So this is it. This is the beginning of the 2012 campaign season. They're desperate for something they can run on that isn't the economy, and by golly, this is going to be it. I also noticed at the very end there was that little thing about, the little news thing about, according to studies, most Americans don't have the savings to deal with an emergency. Gee, you think we're impoverished? Of course we don't have savings. All of our money got taken away from us to give to the bankers to loan back to us at interest, and then they just put it in their pockets. So no, we don't have savings. The Federal Reserve, all your dollar are belong to us. That's kind of been the attitude that we've seen here for the last decade going on here. Anyway, I don't know if I mentioned this before. It's Monday, June 20th, 2011. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. Brett's in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping me out of trouble, and answering your phone calls when you call on in. We're going to be talking a lot about the economy today, and I want to go through a little demonstration and an exercise, and I know I've done this before on the air, but I feel it is really important to have this little thought experiment in your mind, because we're starting to hear all these news stories about how, the debt is out of control. Is the debt payable? And, of course, no, it isn't. It was never intended to be. The debt is designed to not be payable, to keep us slaves to the bankers. And all it cost them was ink and paper and corrupting a few Congress critters and presidents along the way. And I want to basically illustrate in a very simple way, because it is a very simple mechanism that has resulted in all of this debt in all of what used to be considered the wealthiest nations on earth. And they're all in debt. And everybody's saying, where did the money go? Well, the truth is, it didn't go anywhere. The debt is manufactured. It's bookkeeping only, and this is how it works. We have this new perversion of economics called debt-based currency. And it's important to understand that debt-based currencies as a national currency are only about 150 years old, no more than 200 years old. It's a recent experiment. It's a recent invention. It is not the way banking has been done throughout all of history, certainly not the form of banking and economics that the United States was started with. But basically, how it works is, and here in the United States, we're talking about the Federal Reserve going back to 1913. The way it works, all value-based money, all money that had inherent worth or even promised worth, was taken out of circulation, and instead we got these notes that represented a loan from the private central bank. That there is the trap. All the money in circulation under the Federal Reserve, under the European Common Bank, under the IMF is the proceed of a loan, and that's the trap. And the way it works is very simple. Let us say that I am a money junkie banking executive operating a private central bank issuing debt-based currency to all of you at interest. And I have a printing press and a bunch of paper and ink, and I print up these little pretty printed pieces of paper. And I loan this note to you for your commerce, for your business, whatever. You now owe me this bill, this $1 plus accruing interest. So someplace down the road you come back to me and you give me back that dollar. But hey, I say, you owe me $1.10. Here's the problem, though. That 10 cents doesn't exist. It never did. Now, you may go to somebody else who's borrowed one of these notes and say, I need 10 cents to pay off my loan to the private central bank. Or I'll sell you something and you give me the 10 cents that I can pay off the interest to this private central bank. But they're giving you that 10 cents out of money they borrowed from the private central bank. It doesn't matter how much you shuffle the money around or how you manage it or how complex you make it all look. It still comes down to every time one of these paper notes goes into circulation, more money is then owed to the private central bank than is actually in existence. Everything the government does, everything the bank does, simply increases the debt faster than the money supply. Even the bailouts, they talk about loans to Greece. It's just increasing the debt. They may have more of these paper notes to play with, but when all those paper notes have shuffled through and head back to that central bank, the total debt has still gone up. What we're looking at when we talk about all the trillions of dollars of debt owed by all the Western nations, it's a phantom debt. The money owed never existed. And so when you see people talking about can the debt be paid off, the answer is no, of course it can't. The system is designed to create more debt than can ever be paid off. The system is designed to always have more debt than there is available money to pay it off. And the economists know this and the politicians know this, but they go along with it because they're getting donations and contributions and their investments are working out, and they figure it's going to be somebody else's problem to deal with down the road. The Congress that sold us into the debt slavery of the Federal Reserve, they're all dead and gone. They got their money, they got their goodies, they had really good lives, and they had fun. And they figured, somebody else's problem to take care of. Same thing with Woodrow Wilson. Now, he did express regret in his diary that he had made a hideous mistake in signing the Federal Reserve Act, and that he recognized the fact he destroyed his country. But he didn't do anything about it, and neither has any subsequent president or Congress. They understand that's how it works. They're still going on trying to present to you that there's a solution out there somewhere. If you will simply work hard and give all your wealth over to the government to give to the bankers, the problem can be solved. And the truth is, it cannot. It is really that simple. I, as the central bank, print up this piece of paper and loan it to you, and when you give it back to me in repayment, you still owe me another 10 cents. That has never ever existed. And that is the debt trap. That's the paper dollar trap, and that is why this 150-year-old experiment with debt-based currencies issued by private central banks is a failure. It is a failure. It is a failure. It is time to understand that and accept it. The world debt is unpayable because the money to pay it has never existed. It is a bookkeeping entry only. When you run about your commerce, the bankers basically said, I get a piece of the action of everything that you're doing in the form of debt. Every time that piece of paper changes hands, the society as a whole owes me another penny. And over the last 100 years, all of that debt, that imaginary debt on the money, has piled up to the point where, on paper, it looks huge. But it's only on paper. Andrew Jackson knew how to deal with this thing. He shut the Second Bank of the United States down. And that is going to be the only solution. The only solution is for the debt-based currency system to be allowed to collapse, for the bankers to have to give up their Lamborghinis and their Bugattis, and we're going to have to go back to a monetary system that works for the people, which is government issues the currency to purchase what it needs. The currency circulates through society to support commerce without accruing interest, and then is taxed back by the government at the very end to balance the books. That is the system the United States started with. The only difference between that and the Federal Reserve is there's a private bank loaning the money at interest to spend into circulation. Then it gets taxed back plus interest. And all the money in circulation under that system is the proceed of a loan. Everything, the dime your kid is putting in the little gumball machine is a loan that is generating interest for the private central bankers. And all they needed to have was printing presses and ink and paper, later computers, and these worthless copper slugs that we have been told are real money ever since 1964. And the only solution is ultimately to do what Andrew Jackson did. I want to read you a quote from Andrew Jackson. Gentlemen, I've had men watching you for a long time, and I'm convinced that you have used the funds of the bank to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul its charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. President Andrew Jackson. And as a matter of fact, shortly after he ended the Second Bank of the United States, there was an attempt on his life, which failed. And then years later, as he lay on his deathbed, the dying words of President Andrew Jackson, I killed the bank. That was how strongly he felt about the sins of private central banking and its predation upon ordinary working people. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. John in California. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking the call. I appreciate it. Hope you and the listeners had a great weekend. I did just want to comment quickly on the monologue you were going off on there. One of the greatest political philosophers and statesmen in American history, Thomas Jefferson, said that the greatest threat to this nation is not a standing army, but a private central bank. So, I mean, these guys that founded our country were talking about this all the way back then, and look what a private central bank has gotten us, really since 1913. But, I mean, even all throughout history, anytime there's a private central bank, it kind of just leads to the problems that we see today. So I just wanted to comment briefly on that.
Yeah, it's not just the private central bank, it's the debt-based currency coupled with it, because there have been private central banks before that didn't use a debt-based currency, and while they certainly had their own evils, the combination of debt-based currency and private central bank, the money junkies are just completely in control of the situation here. But you're absolutely right. If you go back to the Founding Fathers, we fought a war to be free of a private central bank called the Bank of England. And, our public schools will talk about the Tea Act, the Stamp Act, and all of these other issues as a reason for the revolution, but they seldom talk about the Currency Act. And yet it was the Currency Act that really fueled the anger that led to the revolution. And basically, in a nutshell here, when Ben Franklin was the ambassador from the colonies to Great Britain before the war, and he went to London and he saw all this incredible poverty, the kind of stuff that you would read about in Dickens, or the kind of poverty that you saw in Whitechapel during the time of Jack the Ripper, just this incredible poverty and squalor. And the British nobles and bankers were saying, how do you deal with this poverty in the colonies? And Ben Franklin said, we don't have any. Nobody's this poor. We have plenty of money, which gives us full employment. Everybody has a job and everybody has money and everybody's happy. And the Bank of England said, horrors, we cannot allow this to be heard about in the world. And so they lobbied King George III to pass the Currency Act, which required the colonies to conduct their business only in banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And within just the space of a couple of years, the American colonies were plunged into the same squalor and poverty that you were seeing in London. And that is really what fueled the American Revolution. But our schools don't talk about it anymore because, the smart kids are going to stand up and say, wait a minute, that's the system we've got now under the Federal Reserve. And then they'll be made to stay after class and clean the erasers or something like that. So
exactly right.
Yeah.
So, hey, I just wanted to ask you also, I sent you an email earlier this afternoon. There's a guy who basically flew I'm assuming it was just a small, personal private plane, and he was taking pictures all along the Missouri River, basically the border of Nebraska and Iowa. And I mean, if you haven't seen these pictures, you got to see them. I mean, it is just a flood of epic proportions. And I don't see how these nuclear plants
I linked to it. I put them up there. I linked to them.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to check the website before I called in. But I mean, these photos are just amazing, and I just don't see how these plants are not going to be affected. I mean, the water is just everywhere. I mean, you're looking at, there's channels all off of the river, that have been there for years, and I mean, they flood all the time. But I mean, like, this flooding is just something I've never seen, and I was born and raised in Nebraska, lived there for,
here's
all my
the
life,
thing
basically.
you need to keep in mind. Here's the thing you need to keep in mind. All the flood control is already maxed out. The dams are full, the floodgates are already wide open, and the big melt doesn't start for another couple of weeks yet. There's all that snow on the Tetons and the Rockies is going to be coming down, and, everybody's already at their edge. We've got a report. I was going to report on this earlier in the show. We're getting reports that the people at these power stations, at Cooper and at Fort Calhoun, are already waterproofing and barricading the doors inside the lower levels of the buildings, which means they already know the flood is going to keep rising and the water is going to get in there. Now, there have been some levees that failed further up north, or they were blown up, who knows, because we saw those explosives on the road to Joplin. And because of the failure of the levees, the upriver area the flooding is far worse, but further down toward those power stations, they're saying now they can relax and say that the water isn't going to get any higher. But again, we don't know. All it's going to take is a couple of failed dams, and things are really, really going to get ugly.
It's certainly not looking good, and they were reporting that down there in Coopersville, which I believe is Brownsville, Nebraska. It's very, very southeastern corner of Nebraska. They're already like 10 feet. The water's already 10 feet over the levee. What they generally prepare for. So I mean, it's going to be a mess, and it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better. And then I just wanted to comment real quickly. I was just on Haaretz.com, the Israeli daily, and the admiral of the IDF is basically calling the Freedom Flotilla a hate flotilla, and they're saying that they are going to attack the ship, and it is time for the U.S. and the Western world to go to war against the state of Israel for these crimes, for the crimes of 9/11, we could go on and on about all the crimes they've committed. So I just wanted to comment on that. I know you were talking about how basically the United States government is a puppet of the Israelis, and the people are getting sick of it. I mean, these people are just so blatant in their criminality and just their arrogance, trying to say that a flotilla that's bringing medical supplies and toys for children is a hate flotilla. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And people are sick of it. It is, but Senator Kirk,
it's either that or admit that they were wrong, and Israel can never admit that they're wrong. That is their trap. And now this Navy guy has basically painted Israel into the corner because now they have to attack the aid flotilla, or they're seen as backing down from this level. So they're definitely in a rock and a hard place situation. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, okay?
All right. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot for the phone call. Anyway, getting back to this thing about the banks, and we are going to get to that stuff later in the show. Getting back to the bankers' situation, Dr. James Galbraith is basically out there talking with Ron Paul, and Ron Paul's been saying this for a long time. It's time to get rid of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not part of the United States government, pretensions to the contrary notwithstanding. It is a private central bank. It is no more federal than Federal Express or Federal Pizza. They just gave it that name to lull the American people into thinking this was a good thing that they were setting up. And it wasn't. It was an enslavement machine. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about, finally, the political structure, which has known all along that this private central bank issuing a debt-based currency was a pyramid scheme. It's a Ponzi. Because the only way you can keep the system working after you've loaned that first pretty printed piece of paper at interest, the only way you can keep that going is the people who borrowed that money. You have to find wider and wider populations of borrowers. Each succeeding generation must be plunged further into debt to justify the creation of new money, some of which is used to pay the interest on the old money. And as long as you can keep finding those larger populations of borrowers, everything will work out just fine. But when the entire country has been plunged into debt, when you can find no new borrowers, the pyramid collapses, and that's exactly what's going on. As Americans saw their earning capability diminish, and they said, well, we got to get out of debt, and they started paying off their debt, and the bankers said, we can't have that. The system won't work if people get out of debt. The system only works if they're perpetually plunged deeper into debt. And the U.S. government came along and said, not to worry. Not to worry. We will borrow from the bank on behalf of the American people. I will grant you without their permission and their blessing, but we have the authority to do it because we said so. And so the federal government started borrowing trillions and trillions of dollars. They called it the bailouts. They were actually buybacks for all that fraudulent mortgage-backed security stuff that's been going on here. But that's basically what it was. You, the American people, were placed on the hook for all that money the U.S. government borrowed from the Federal Reserve, and it's just more printing press money, to go on out there and try and settle the books. And again, the best analogy for the way a private central bank economy works with a debt-based currency is a boat with 10 holes in the bottom and only 9 corks. And it doesn't matter how many more corks you make, you're cutting them out of the bottom of the boat. And so the number of holes always exceeds the number of corks. And anything that anybody in the government does to try and deal with the economic problems is to yank a cork out of one hole and pound it into another hole and say, look, I'm working on the problem right now. What are they doing in Europe? They're yanking the cork out of the hole of Germany and they're shoving into the hole for Greece and pounding it in saying, see, the problem is solved. And Merkel is saying, no, it isn't. Now we've got the debt problem. It's musical chairs with debt. Nobody has money because it's not a money-based system. It's a debt-based system, and all they can do is throw the debt around like a hot potato. Or like a game of musical chairs, and when the music stops, whoever's stuck with it is the nation that gets crushed down into nothing. And it's all an illusion. This compound interest debt is no more legitimate a means to control a population than divine right or chattel ownership of your body. Ancient civilizations have already gone through this exercise. Civilizations that we've forgotten the name of, that we have no trace of, went through it, because if you think back carefully, virtually every surviving ancient cultural record condemns the usury of money, the loaning at interest of money. It's a religious dogma. That's how important they thought it was to prevent usury. Islam still forbids it to this very day. Christians used to. Then the Templars sort of found a weasel word a way around it by calling it rent on the money. And as soon as that evil emerged again, the private central bank issuing paper and ink that they just make up out of thin air, but you're not allowed to make it up out of thin air to pay them back, that's the trap. That's the enslavement mechanism. It's all about keeping you under control. There was this wonderful movie called The International, and I think I linked a clip from it on today's front page at whatreallyhappened.com, where they talk about what is the essence of banking. Is it business? No, it isn't. It's to keep you a slave to debt. That's why banks love wars. It plunges everybody into debt. And debt is what gives the banks power over your life. So I'm not the only one calling the Federal Reserve a Ponzi scheme. Gerald Calente is also calling it that. Jim Rogers is saying it's time to simply write off the debt. It can't be paid anyway. It's time to zero out the books, have a jubilee, whatever you want to call it. It's time for the U.S. government to start over. It's time to hit the reset button. The bankers are going to have to lose their Lamborghinis and their Bugattis and their $150,000 wristwatches, and they're going to have to go to McDonald's with the rest of us and skip those $200 hamburgers that are garnished with truffle that feeds their ego. It's time to write it all off as an odious debt. Now, I want to get into that topic just a little tiny bit here. We've talked about odious debt before. When the United States government and economy collapses, odious debt is a principle under which we, the American people, can be held liable for money that was borrowed by the previous government for the betterment of the American people, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build roads, to build train tracks, to keep the bridges from collapsing. That is all legitimate debt. But money the government borrows for war, money the government borrows to give to bankers or to give to Israel, money the government borrows to engage in political repression of the American people, to pay for TV cameras on every street corner, that is not the legitimate business of the government. And therefore, because it's not legitimate business of the government as authorized by the American people, we're off the hook for it. And I was rather surprised to find out today that even though the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government are saying that this is not a concept that the American people should even be thinking of right now, and they're already trying to find a way around it so that we cannot escape the debt they have worked so hard to trap us in, it turns out the United States government itself invoked the legal principle of odious debt when they invaded Iraq. And they basically told Russia, well, we're sorry that Iraq owed you $100-some-odd billion, but we're not going to pay it under the principle of odious debt. And so we have these governments that are using this principle that debt incurred for odious purposes is not legitimate, and therefore the people are not liable for it. And I think we need to hang on to that principle, because the overwhelming majority of all of this debt that is, we are told that we owe is money that was borrowed for purposes other than taking care of the American people and providing for the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, good electricity, good phone lines, all of that stuff. That's the legitimate business of the government. All of these wars all around the world, all of this spying and surveillance infrastructure on us, all the money, $27 trillion borrowed and given to Wall Street to save them from mortgage-backed fraud, and all the money that is spent to spy on us, and all the money that was borrowed to buy new weapons for Israel and new weapons for war and everything, all of that, we're not liable. We have a legitimate legal and moral right to say, we didn't agree with it, we will not pay it. The message going out from the people of Iceland and Greece and Spain and Yemen and Egypt and all these other countries is, you bozos got into this financial mess without our permission, and you can get out of it or not without our help. We didn't agree to a debt-based currency system. We didn't have a chance to vote on it. The people who sold us into the slavery of the Federal Reserve System did it almost 100 years ago. We had nothing to say with it. We just woke up in the maternity ward and they said, well, guess what? This is the financial system you're going to have to spend the rest of your life slaving under. And we have a right to say no. We want the money system, we want the economy that the nation was started with. When they said no private central banks, they fought a war to say no private central banks. We need to go back to the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And obviously, a great deal of financial attention is focused on Greece. I know you wouldn't know it from the American media. They're still going on about Representative Weiner and Sarah Palin and all that other stuff. Over the weekend, there was a report that Germany had reversed itself. Merkel had reversed herself and had agreed to use German taxpayer funds to at least partially ameliorate a potential default by Greece. Then late yesterday, they came back and said, no, that deal wasn't going to work. I can imagine probably a lot of German people were glaring in through the office window. Because if you really think about it, every single solution proposed for this gigantic global debt problem is to go out to the people and grab some more money from them because they're just generous sweethearts and they will never fight back no matter how much you take from them. Obviously, that's not a situation that will continue for much longer. Now, Alan Greenspan, and remember, Alan Greenspan, in a moment of candor during the recent celebration of the centennial of the creation of the Federal Reserve down on Jekyll Island in Georgia. That's where they all snuck off to, hatch this fiendish plot. So they had a party, and Alan Greenspan was down there, and in a moment of candor, on camera, admitted that the current economic crash involved massive fraud and criminality on the part of Wall Street. And I think I do have his quote up here. Yeah, here we are.
Things were being done which were certainly illegal and clearly criminal in certain cases, which fraud is a fact. Fraud creates very considerable instability in competitive markets. If you cannot trust your counterparties, it won't work. And indeed, we saw that it didn't.
So that was basically a wonderful moment of candor. All of this that we have had to suffer through for 10 years now goes back to the 1999 repeal of Glass-Steagall, which allowed banks and investment houses to basically get into each other's businesses, which was exactly the same kind of situation that led to the crash of 1929. History repeats, which is what's wrong with history. And in the heart of all that was this gigantic financial swindle, the mortgage-backed securities fraud. And they're admitting it was a fraud. they took all these bundled mortgages. In some cases, the mortgages were being pledged to multiple investment packages, which you can't do. They were dragging in mortgages that were already in default, the whole subprime thing. They just needed more mortgages to fuel this huge bubble in these mortgage-backed securities. And they sold them all over the world. They promised they were AAA, and they weren't. And now the banks of the world have come back to the United States and said, you have to make good on this, or we'll take you to court and we'll sue you and we'll put you in jail. And so the U.S. government has basically looted the American people to give to Wall Street so the Wall Street robber barons can buy back all those fraudulent mortgage-backed securities. And that's the reason our lives have been looted, our homes taken, to keep the banks solvent. During the hearings in Congress, Damon Slivers said we can either have an honest discussion about the foreclosure crisis or we can preserve the capital structure of the banks. We can't do both. Which shall we do? And obviously, in hindsight, Congress decided it was more important to keep the bankers in their Lamborghinis than to keep Americans in their homes. That was the choice they made, and it's a conscious, deliberate choice. And they know it. No wonder they're trying to wave gay marriage around as the issue for 2012. So now Greenspan is basically saying it's the Greek default will cause a U.S. double dip. Why? Because of those credit default swaps. See, the way it works is when Greece was borrowing money as a hedge, the banks loaning Greece money were buying credit default swaps, insurance. They were basically saying, if Greece defaults, you will pay me X number of dollars. And those insurance policies, those credit default swaps, were being sold to the banks in France by Wall Street. And that is the problem. And again, this is the dark side of globalism. The entire world economic system is one gigantic ball of intertwined connections. And when there's a disaster in one place, the whole thing unwinds. And that's what's going on here. So Greece is going to default because the entire economy is based on debt, not value. And certainly, I don't know what's going on in Greece, but I know in this country, at a time when the debt was increasing, our government gave tax credits to corporations to send the higher-paying jobs overseas, partly to lower labor costs for favored campaign donor corporations, and more to the point, to make it easier for banks to confiscate homes. Oh, you can't pay your mortgage anymore because your job is over there in Bangladesh. Too bad. We need the home on our balance sheet to stay solvent because we just had to buy a couple of $1 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities from Deutsche Bank or Credit Suisse or the Bank of Libya. Remember that big stink a couple of months ago about why was the Federal Reserve giving all this money to the Bank of Libya? They weren't giving it. They were buying back these botched investments. Remember, Goldman Sachs lost 90% of the money that the Bank of Libya invested in these mortgage-backed securities. And so now the Federal Reserve is making good on money that you and your children and grandchildren are expected to pay back with your labor. Remember, the Federal Reserve can just create the money out of thin air to loan out. You are not allowed to create that same money out of thin air to pay it back. Kind of sucks, doesn't it, if you think about it? So that's what's going on. The Greece default, and it's going to default. The Greek people are saying, we didn't make this mess. We're not going to pay for it. The bankers went on a gambling binge. And we're not going to pay for it because we will not go back to being a fascist dictatorship. And the reason I say that, there's a very specific reason. When you talk about a capitalist economic state, that means that if you make a lot of money, you're free to keep it. And if you lose a lot of money, you're stuck. There's nobody coming to save you. Freedom means the freedom to succeed. It also means the freedom to fail and the freedom to be very, very alone. And that's part of what personal responsibility that comes with freedom really means. Now, under socialism, under communism, profit and loss are socialized across society. If you make a lot of money, it's taxed away from you to benefit the society. If you lose a lot of money, then the society will put money in to keep your business going. That's what communism is. Fascism, profit is kept private, and only the losses are socialized across society, and that's what we're seeing in Greece. That's what we're seeing here in the United States of America. When the Wall Street con artists make billions of dollars for themselves, they get to keep it. They get to drive the Lamborghinis and the Bugattis. But if they lose billions of dollars or trillions of dollars on these credit default swaps, what happens? I need a bailout. I need a bailout, Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam says, that's all right. We'll just get the money from the American people, and we will cover all your losses for you. They've been doing it all the way back to the S&L bailout of the 1980s. That was when George Bush Sr. proved to the rest of the world, yeah, we can get away with this. You can put your money in the United States of America, and if you lose it, we'll get the American people to cover all the losses. They fell for it. See? We made it work. And, of course, that's now small potatoes compared to what they're doing to you right now to bail Wall Street out of the mortgage-backed security fraud. It's kind of like running a casino. That's what Wall Street has become. It's a casino where, rich people can go in and they can have a spin at the wheel, and if they win, they put it in their pocket and they go home. And if they lose, the management of the casino passes the hat among the bartender and the people at the front desk and the bellhops and the cooks and porters and all the laundry people. They pass the hat for a collection to give to the rich person so he can go back for another spin at the wheel. That's the way Wall Street is being run. And the people of Greece have had enough of that. So did the people of Iceland. So did the people of Egypt. So do the people of all these Middle Eastern nations that the United States is now in there trying to bomb them back into the graces of a private central bank. And by the way, did you notice the Libyan rebels, the side that the U.S. purports to be supporting, although given NATO's lousy aim, we're not really sure whether that is true or not. But the first thing the rebels said is, yeah, we'll allow a private central bank. That Gaddafi, he wanted a gold dinar. He wanted a value-based currency issued by a state bank. Ooh, horrible, bad Gaddafi. And the bombs start falling. And the Libyan rebels are saying, yeah, we'll go to a debt-based currency. We'll sell our people into a private central bank. Come in and help us bomb our way, make the world safe for compound interest. And that's exactly what the United States is doing in Libya. Every Arab nation, every Middle Eastern nation that stood up and said, we don't want to do banking the way you do it in the West, has been attacked or will be attacked in the case of Iran. When they talk about the clash of civilizations, they're not talking about religion. They're not talking about Christianity versus Islam. They're talking about a war between banking systems. You are being asked to sacrifice the life of your family members to enforce a private banking system on the rest of the world, to enslave them the way our country has been enslaved. We have been through this in ancient times. That's why the oldest religions all ban this kind of banking activity. They went through it once before. In times so old, we have forgotten about it. But that relic of that huge social upheaval is still there in the religious prohibitions against usury of money. Somebody in the dim reaches of early history, some civilization, paid a hideous price to learn that lesson, and they tried to pass it on. They tried to pass on a warning not to allow that kind of banking to come to dominate in society. So, anyway. Now, interestingly enough, over in Greece, there's a video called Debtocracy, which we have linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. It was a documentary made for only $15,000, and it has become the focus for the resistance in Greece by basically saying it doesn't matter how much we sacrifice, Greece and the Greek government will never get out of debt. It doesn't matter how much you give up. It doesn't matter how much austerity there is, because the debt always exceeds all of the money in supply. You could give everything you have to the Federal Reserve right now, or to the Bank of Greece, or to the European Common Bank, or the IMF, including the clothes you're wearing right now. You could be standing there naked and penniless, and there would still be debt, because that's the way the system works. We're going to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be back in about 7 minutes. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 2 of our show. I'm going to finish up with the economy because I know you're tired of hearing about that, and I know I focus on it a very great deal, but remember Rivero's rule of the news. If it affects your life, it's news. If it doesn't affect your life, it's a distraction. And right now we're seeing so much distractions out there to try and get you to not pay attention to the things that are really, really affecting your life. So just a couple more things on the economic front. Russia is continuing to reduce their U.S. debt holdings. I hope that doesn't mean that Bernanke is running that printing press again the way he did to buy back some of China's debt holdings, because that's triggered a huge Chinese run on American real estate and hard assets. Could see the same thing with Russia. We may be looking at the fire sale, the American liquidation sale. Just print up a bunch of money, let these nations that hold all this American debt just come in and buy up the place. And we're going to become tenants on the land that used to belong to we, the people. I'm not even sure that it's legal for the government to sell public assets to get out of its debt problems like they're talking about over in Greece. And certainly this hue and cry of privatization. Every time the IMF comes in and says, we'll give you more debt and more paper notes to play with, and the first thing they say is, you've got to privatize. You've got to take all those assets that your people already paid to build and maintain with their taxes and sell them to us so we can rent them back to the people. That's what privatization means, taking the property of the people and giving it to the bankers so they can rent it back to the people. And they're going to go on doing it until you make them stop. They don't have a reason to stop. It works for them. They're all getting rich. They have all the goodies. They love the system just fine here. Over the weekend, we started hearing that various metals brokerages dealing in contracts for future contracts for differences and contracts for future deliveries for metals, the paper gold and silver trade, not gold and silver bullion and coins, but the paper trade in gold and silver, are starting to say that they will no longer be in that line of work. Forex came out and said they're going to start shutting their contracts down as of July 15th. CMC Markets down in Australia is saying July 29th is their last day to do it. What may be happening is, as you're probably aware from Max Kaiser and some of the other people reporting on this, the companies that have been trading in gold and silver investments have shorted their customers. They've been running the gold and silver brokerage business the way banks run their deposits. They don't actually have all of the money that you have put on deposit there for you to take out. They have just that little reserve, the amount that can be reasonably expected to be called on for every single day for the people to come on in and make their withdrawals. And what we're finding out now is that these companies that sell these paper certificates saying you have so many bars of gold in our vaults are in point of fact selling more paper than they have gold in order to make a lot of money, and they operate it because they have enough gold and silver in their vaults to cover what would be a normal number of people coming in and demanding the physical metal. But because of concerns about this short selling, more and more people are coming in to demand the physical metal. And so now, because of this new legislation that was passed by the Congress, it looks like this particular scam is being shut down before it becomes another huge financial scandal. Now, this does not affect gold and silver dealers who are dealing in coins or bullion bars or even jewelry for that matter. But it is rather alarming that the U.S. government is taking steps to basically limit the kinds of investments that you can partake in. And setting the issue of short selling aside, what it tells us, along with the arrest of Bernard von Nothaus for the Liberty Dollar, is that by law we are being constrained more and more to only conduct our business in the coin of the realm, as it were, the Federal Reserve note, and to invest our money only in the stock market in order to keep them up. There's been a big problem with the government trying to discourage people from going into gold and silver investments as a hedge against inflation, because people who have got the disposable income or the investment income to go into that tend to pull it out of the stock market. And a lot of observers understand that the high soaring number of the stock market is a fictitious creation of the plunge protection team, the president's working group on the markets, and that the current stock market is more overvalued now today than it was just moments before the crash of 1929. And so the government is trying to create a legal political climate where you only put your money into the stock market in order to keep it up, and you're only transacting business in Federal Reserve notes. You're not allowed to go to another system because that is a threat to the private central bank. And that really is the essence of dictatorship, when they're telling you you must do your business through this bank, you must invest your money only in these state-approved investments. It's like the Soviet Union here. You must have green light bulbs in your house. So a lot of people are saying, what is this going to do to the price of gold and silver coins and gold and silver bullion? And I expect that as we get to the end of these contracts in these various paper trading houses, there'll be an increase in price because they're going to be scrambling to get the last bits of gold and silver to do the physical delivery on their contracts. Some of them will probably offer a premium to people who will cash out their contracts for cash, and they'll get a premium payment on that. But that's probably going to drive up gold and silver prices a little bit. Then after that paper investment thing goes down, there may be a slight suppression of gold and silver prices. It's not going to plunge, I don't think. And as soon as people see what the dollar is continuing to do, they'll probably go right back into buying gold and silver coins. My concern here is that, remember, the United States government has a past history of declaring private ownership of investment metals illegal, and then simply saying, you will turn them in for more of these pretty printed pieces of paper. They did it in 1933. Franklin Roosevelt confiscated the gold to prop up the American banking system, and you got lots of these little pretty printed pieces of paper in exchange for your gold coins and gold bars. They did allow people to keep gold jewelry. So that's a good place. If you're going to be buying gold as an investment hedge, buy it as 24-karat gold jewelry for two reasons. One, jewelry will be exempt from gold confiscation programs, I hope. And two, when you hang that around your wife's neck, there's certain side benefits to that form of gold investment here. Now, over in Washington, D.C., as you know, there's this fight going on between the White House and the United States Congress over the war in Libya. And it's rather interesting to recall that when Barack Obama was a senator, he was all saying about, the president must go to the Congress for authorizations to carry out war. Now that he's the president, of course, his tune has changed, and he's saying, well, it's not really a war. It's a decisive kinetic engagement, or it's a shrunk, or it's a FISBIN. And he's basically weasel wording to get out of the limitations imposed by the War Power Act. So Congress is now talking about simply defunding the Libyan operation, to simply say we are in control of the nation's purse strings and we are going to cut the funding to the war because the voters are tired of war. We have been at war with this whole, new American century pattern for longer than we were in World War II, and people are tired of the war. They're tired of their kids coming home in body bags and cheap aluminum boxes. They're tired of the poverty that we see all around us caused by the war spending. We've had it, and we don't see this as a moral war or a clean war. We see this as a war on Israel's enemies, and obviously a war on banking systems that do not conform to the requirements of the IMF. So now the White House is basically getting all huffy and saying, you better not cut the funds to my war. And, of course, Defense Secretary Gates is saying that if Congress defunds the Libyan war, it will lead to more terrorism and more bad things. You've got to keep giving us your money. Remember what Eisenhower said about the military-industrial complex? You're looking at it right now. Why do these other countries hate us? It's not because we're free. It's because every time they see their family members blown to bloody bits in front of their eyes, the shrapnel is stamped, made in the USA. Meanwhile, over in Iraq, you probably heard last week there was this scandal where $6 billion, with a B, had just sort of gone walkabout. Money that was put into Iraq to try and build up the place, to sort of cover over the bomb holes and bullet holes and all the rest of that. Now they're saying basically that loss might be as much as $18 billion that vanished through corruption and fraud within the ranks of the military. But it's gone. Remember the pallets of shrink-wrapped cash that were flown into Iraq following the war? A shot of that was even in Michael Moore's movie about the war in Iraq. In Fahrenheit 9/11, just literally pallets of cash on forklift, shrink wrap, just stacks of cash that went into Iraq, and nobody knows where any of it went. And of course, remember the biggest vanishing act, and I'll bet we all wish we had that money right now. On September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld got up in the Pentagon in front of a room full of reporters and admitted the Pentagon had just lost $2.3 trillion of your tax dollars. Should have been the financial scandal of the century, but of course 24 hours later the World Trade Centers were falling down and reporters completely forgot about all that missing money at the Pentagon. We'll be back after these commercials. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And NATO is now admitting that, yeah, they are killing civilian non-combatants in the attacks on Tripoli. But rest assured, they feel really, really bad about it. But it appears they're going to go on doing that as long as somebody else is willing to pay the bills. At some point, I mean, we know the lesson of Vietnam. You cannot win a war entirely from the air. There's going to be a ground invasion, even though a ground invasion was not authorized by the United Nations resolution. But they're going to do a ground invasion because the goal is to go in there, grab all that gold bullion, grab that wonderful freshwater system that Gaddafi built. It's like one of the wonders of the modern world that just, brought water and life out of desert. It's just an amazing piece of engineering. And certain nations in the area want to run a hose over to that and tap into that whole situation. And, of course, there's Gaddafi's ultimate sin, which was not Pan Am 103, which looks to be a frame-up job anyway. Gaddafi's sin, the one he's being made to pay for now, is the Bank of Libya, which is a state-owned central bank that has a value-based currency, the gold dinar. And the reason Libya had to be taken out is the other nations in Africa were all saying, that's a really good idea. We all know that what the U.S. is doing with the Federal Reserve and what Europe is doing with the ECB and what the IMF is trying to do to the entire planet is a system that is doomed to utter destruction after it makes the bankers rich. So we're going to go with this value-based currency because, heck, that's what turned the young United States of America into the nation with the highest standard of living before the bankers showed up. So they're in there, Libya, and they're killing civilians, and they're admitting they're killing civilians, which basically destroys the moral high ground of this war's existence. You and I were all told, we're going to go into Libya, we're going to support the revolution and the Arab springtime and all. And it's hijacked. What the U.S. is doing is they're going in to hijack all of these revolutions, to go in there and divert them and say, look, we'll side with the other guy, but we can side with you. It all depends on which one of you is going to give us the best deal for the post-revolution environment. Who's going to be the best puppet for us all? Who's going to make sure that the private central bankers get in here? Who's going to be willing to sell their people into the clutches of the IMF? And that's what it is. They're hijacking these legitimate revolutions because they can get away with that in these small Arab nations. They're not going to be able to do that in Greece. They're not going to be able, they weren't able to do it in Iceland. They weren't able to do it in Egypt. They're trying now to go in there and try and subvert and buy off the new Egyptian government to behave like the old Egyptian government. But the people of Egypt are standing around there glaring at the new politicians. And the new politicians are remembering the lesson of the French Revolution. It wasn't just one. It was several. And if they don't improve life for the Egyptian people, there will be another revolution. It's not just, revolution is more than simply changing who gets the bribes paid to them. Revolution means you revolutionize the society and you take care of the people. You revolve the society so the people who were driven down to the bottom at least come back to the middle. So, here in the United States, the U.S. Conference of Mayors have approved a resolution on Monday, obviously non-binding, calling for an accelerated end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They want to bring the war dollars home. The mayors of the American cities understand probably better than most how much this constant war spending has destroyed the local economies and the local ability to take care of the American people. We're in a wartime economy. All you have to do is look around and you can see it. And we're losing. You can tell from the decay of our nation before your very eyes. We're losing these wars. We couldn't win to begin with. We don't have the manufacturing capacity, we don't have the boots on the ground, and we don't have the money to fight a major prolonged series of wars. But the bankers who are behind it all don't care. They don't care if the United States loses the war. All they want is that debt to pile up on both sides. That's all they care about. That's the essence of banking. I think I have that quote here, as a matter of fact, right now. Let me give this to you again.
The IBBC is a bank. Their objective isn't to control the conflict. It's to control the debt that the conflict produces. You see, the real value of a conflict, the true value, is in the debt that it creates. You control the debt, you control everything. You find this upsetting, yes? But this is the very essence of the banking industry. to make us all, whether we be nations or individuals, slaves to debt.
That's it. That's the essence of banking. To get a printing press and some ink and paper and a corrupted government willing to go along with it to print up these paper notes, these paper chains, if you will, to enslave the people to death, to keep them under your control, to be able to send them off on wars of conquest, to be able to convince them that they have some kind of a spiritual obligation to work as hard as they can for their entire life and then simply turn over the proceeds of that work to the bankers in exchange for ink and paper. That's all it is the ink and paper. Now, let's see. Up in Idaho, interesting story. We're going to lighten things up a little bit here. Senator John McGee, the Majority Caucus chair in the Idaho State House, was arrested yesterday morning, charged with grand theft and driving under the influence. Apparently, he was drinking, wanted to go for a ride, and got into somebody else's truck and just was driving around, joyriding. And the cops picked him up, and apparently his explanation to them was he was looking for the promised land. And the police are saying basically he didn't really know where he was. He was in an altered state, not associated with meditation. And it's just another reminder, along with Representative Weiner, the problem with political power is that it attracts the very sort of people who should never be allowed to have it. When the nation was founded, being a legislator was a part-time gig. It was an honor. It was an obligation. It was a duty to serve. But you didn't get a lot of money for it. You didn't get a lot of fame for it at the time. You had to pay pretty much your own way. Everybody who was a politician when the nation started, they had their own businesses to pay their own way. It wasn't a permanent ruling class like it is today. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, you probably heard over the last week this controversy over the city council in Cedar Falls basically mandating that all residents and businesses have to install this little lockbox on their property where it's publicly accessible, and that inside this lockbox they have to have a copy of the keys to their home or business, and that in theory, at least, only the police and fire departments are able to open the lockboxes in order to get the keys to go into their property in the event of an emergency, we are told. Now, obviously, the residents of Cedar Falls are very upset at this idea because, frankly, it's the government and the police that they're most afraid of. And they know that the fire department, when the fire department shows up, the place is on fire and the locks aren't going to be an issue anyway. They just, pound in with the axes and whatnot. So, in light of that, it turns out there's this interesting story up at Worcester State University where the campus police working the graveyard shift were caught repeatedly on the campus video surveillance system using their keys to basically go into this little cafe that's on the campus and simply help themselves to food and drink. It's kind of like a permanent perk of the job. And this is why this lockbox idea is very stupid. I'm old enough to remember from the time when I was living in Southern California, the entire Hollywood division of the LAPD got busted for running a two-order burglary ring. You'd call up a Hollywood cop and you'd say, I need a new TV set. What, 26, 27? 27-inch. And the cops would bring it by later that day. We all remember the corruption of the Rampart Division. We all remember, when I was going to Cal State Fullerton, the best drug connection in town was a California highway patrolman, was ripping the stuff out of the police evidence locker and selling it out of the back of his black and white. We all thought it was funny. He retired and bought himself a Radio Shack franchise. So this idea that we be forced to have the keys to our home where the police can just grab them whenever they want without difficulty, especially in an era where they don't even need warrants to come on in anymore, and we have courts saying you don't have a right to defend your home against the police even when it's an illegal entry. We're entering into an age of pillage where the police departments are going to be looting our homes and businesses to keep themselves going, and the city government will look the other way because better to let the police fund themselves out of your business place, out of your campus cafe, than have to, start firing the police because we don't have enough money to feed them ourselves. That's what pillage is. An occupying army supports itself simply by stealing from the occupied people. That's where we are right now. That's what these lockboxes are about. That's what this story about the campus cafe is all about. We are in an era where the government, the occupying force, because they're not here doing this with our permission. We are an occupied country right now. And they're pillaging the population to support themselves. They're just taking whatever they want, under any pretense that they want. We all know how the civil forfeiture laws have gone completely out of control. And so now the city governments are saying, yeah, you have to give the police unfettered access to your property, even when you're away from there. Stuff starts vanishing from your home and there's no sign of forced entry. This is probably why it's a really good idea. You know, we were talking with Anthony Ibarra over at Diginet, and they have now these little motion-activated video recorders that are hidden inside clocks, VCRs, and what look like smoke alarms. If you're in a community where they're getting those lock boxes and forcing you to leave your keys where the police can get them, you need to get these cameras. And you need to let the community know that some homes in the community have these cameras to videotape the police if they should come in and help themselves to your TV set. You don't all have to get them, but if some have, it will be a deterrent. Get a little sticker that says, this house under video surveillance, or this business under video surveillance. If you catch the police officers in there on tape, they're going to have to explain why they thought it was necessary to come into your house. They'll probably have a really good story, but still, it's embarrassing. Now, speaking of embarrassing, there's this interesting article about where have all the snow globes gone. Apparently, there was a recent craze about snow globes where you could get your pictures in them, and we all know what snow globes are. You shake them, and the stuff goes on. Years and years ago, Pixar did this wonderful little animated film about a snow globe called Knick Knack, and it's considered a classic of early CGI animation. Well, apparently, those are now in decline because the snow globes, after they're purchased as a souvenir wherever they're going, don't get to go home with the traveler. Why? Because the TSA, and by the way, they just arrested another guy down in Texas for stealing from people's luggage. The TSA is enforcing this no liquids on board the flight. And people don't want to pack these snow globes in their checked baggage because they get broken. They want to have it in their carry-on, and the TSA is saying, no, you can't do it. We used to have a little thing that we sold here in Hawaii called the Hawaii Snowman. I mean, before the Ice Age started. And it was just a jar with water and a hat, a carrot, and a bunch of lumps of coal. And it melted. That was the joke. And now we don't sell those anymore. Why? Because if you buy them, the TSA will take them away from you before you can get on the airplane. Isn't that fun? And don't we wonder why the tourism has just gone into the Al-Qaeda around here? So all of these things are now in the state surplus store of whatever jurisdiction, the airports are in. They're reselling what the TSA workers are taking from your luggage. It's pillage. That's what it is. They take a Swiss Army knife from your luggage. It goes up for sale on the state board. They've been selling some stuff on eBay, some of it officially and some of it unofficially, like the guy in Newark. But that's what it is. They're making money off the stuff they take from you, all in the name of security and making sure that you're safe from whatever bad guy, Emmanuel Goldstein is up on the wall. The 2-minute hate. Ooh, he's bad, and he justifies my taking things out of your luggage here. So let's see. The recent arrest of that TSA worker in Texas has again ignited the debate over the proposed Texas law saying, you guys don't put your hands down their pants and stay out of their luggage. And remember, TSA has never, ever once actually caught a real terrorist. Caught a lot of phony blondes, but not one real terrorist. All right, moving over to the situation here in Fukushima. Science magazine is reporting that Japanese scientists have become so worried about their own children's health, and in the awareness that the government of Japan is not being forthcoming about the threat of radiation from Fukushima, they've started their own radiation monitoring program and making their own maps, and the results are shocking. They're finding radiation hotspots in Tokyo itself. 3.5 times higher than the maximum safe limit defined by Japanese law. Now, Japan is probably going to do what the United States did, which is raise that maximum limit. Oh, you're exposed to horrendous amounts of radiation. Let me just erase this number over here and put a bigger number there. And see, now it's okay. The new legal limit says you're all safe. Don't you feel so much better? Now, up in Northern California, and this is intruding into the realm of direct family. Oh, we got to take a break for commercials. When we come back, I want to talk about radiation sickness symptoms. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about radiation sickness. And we are continuing to get anecdotal reports of people experiencing what appear to be the initial stages of radiation sickness. And we're not talking Japan. That's been happening in Japan for several weeks now. Now we're talking about Northern California. People getting a sudden unexplained metallic taste in their mouth. That's from the iodine. Surprise muscle cramps that will not go away. Swollen lymph glands. Hives. All kinds of things like that. The part that concerns me is whether the U.S. government or state government health statistics to report on things like, these strange illnesses, if we can trust them. Because obviously, as the U.S. government is attempting to sort of keep a lid on this whole Fukushima situation, not to mention the one down in Fort Calhoun, obviously this situation where information that we the people could be using to trace or track the health ramifications and implications of the radiation that we know is already all over the Northern Hemisphere, that may be hidden from us as well. We know we have a government that doesn't want us to have accurate information. They just want to keep on feeding us the information that will lead us to conclude of our own free will what the government wants us to be thinking. All right, somebody just sent this in response to my TSA and firefighters stealing food from the campus thing. Apparently 3 Kansas firefighters were fired for looting from the homes where the tornado hit in Joplin. And apparently when the tornado struck, these firefighters were caught looting from the businesses or they had the windows blown out. I must say that's a little disappointing. I kind of always presume the firefighters to be the last bastion of honor and duty in the United States of America, and I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that story here. All righty, it is now coming out in the aftermath of the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster and the Deepwater Horizon explosion. We came to find out that the Minerals Management Service, the U.S. government agency that was supposed to be keeping an eye on oil harvesting in the Gulf, in the United States as a whole, for as a matter of fact, had sort of mutated over time to sort of view its role as supportive of the industry itself rather than keeping an eye on safety and what was best for the people of the United States of America. And it's certainly not the first time we've seen that behavior. We know that Bernie Madoff with the loot was able to do what he did, cheating his own investors for $65 billion over a period of 12 years. Despite people like Harry Markopoulos coming forward and saying, look, this guy's got to be doing something crooked. I've got the evidence for you right here. And every time the SEC went over to Bernie Madoff's outfit, they'd give him resumes. They wanted to sign up because they're making money hand over fist there. So the SEC kind of sees itself more as in line with Wall Street's bankers and CEOs and investment houses. Minerals Management Service kind of saw itself as supportive of the oil industry rather than an overseer. Now we're finding out that the nuclear regulatory agencies have sort of been going along that same model with all of these fission reactors. And just like we saw the EPA raise the maximum safe exposure level in the wake of Fukushima, and just as we saw the Food and Drug Administration announce they're not even going to test Pacific seafood for radiation any longer, now we're finding out that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission was changing the safety standards as power stations in the United States of America were becoming less and less safe. Rather than correct the problems, the NRC was simply changing the safety requirements. so that these reactors could go on operating in a less than perfectly safe situation. Now, interesting little sideline here. The kind of reactor that is used in the United States of America, the kind of reactor they had at Fukushima, the light water reactor, has been promoted in the United States of America not because it's the safest form of nuclear reactor, but because it's the kind of nuclear reactor that works in nuclear submarines. Remember what I said before. One of the reasons the United States government continues to promote nuclear power in the United States of America is because it's dual-use technology, and all the money that is spent for developing nuclear reactor technology for power stations can then be used to support weapons system development. And if the power stations were using a kind of reactor that does not work well in the submarines, then that benefit is lost. And so we're looking at this very reckless, very dangerous kind of reactor was chosen not because it's best for the American people, but because it supports nuclear power in submarines. Now, interesting story came through. The reason I want to bring this back up here. The Nebraska nuclear plant has issued a flood alert. This is down at the Cooper facility, down by Brownsville. And there's a quote in this story I want to read to you, directly quote. Becker said that the river is expected to crest there at a little over 900 feet. At such a level, officials would need to barricade internal doorways at the plant to protect equipment. In other words, they already understand that the aqua dams and sandbags they put up around these facilities are not likely to hold as the floodwaters continue to rise. Remember, the big melt doesn't even start till next month. And if they're having to barricade and waterproof these doors in the lower part of the building to protect equipment, means they know that all these outer barriers are not going to hold. There's going to be water in the building, and if it shorts out those cooling pumps, then we're going to have a major nuclear accident right in the middle of the United States of America. Here's where it gets really kind of an irony here. There is a sand shortage. There's a shortage of the sand needed to fill the sandbags. Normally, they'd harvest it from the bottom of the rivers, but they can't get at it. Why did they not have sandbags, stockpiled and sand stockpiled to deal with the flooding? Well, because remember, everyone was told not going to be any snow, won't be any flood, the world is getting warmer, snow is a thing of the past. And they're caught off guard. They were unprepared to deal with these 3 record winters in a row, and now they're unprepared to deal with the spring melts. Because they believed the carbonazis, that the world was getting warmer and you don't have to prepare about all that stuff because you're going to have to pay a carbon tax instead. All righty, we're coming up on the end of the show here. Let's see, let me skip on down here. Earlier in the show, we had the caller who called in about this Israel Navy commander, Adam Eliezer Marom, I hope that's pronounced correctly, basically came out in a statement yesterday saying that the hate flotilla, in Israel's eyes, if you have cookies and candies for children, that makes you, hateful. You're a terrorist group because you've got Oreo cookies of mass destruction. And he's basically saying that it will be stopped with military force. Now, this puts Israel in a very, very bad situation because Israel can never back down. They can never back up and say, we've had a rethink. And so this Israel's Navy commander has committed Israel to attacking the Gaza flotilla, the humanitarian flotilla. Because now they're trapped by their own ego and arrogance, and they've painted themselves into a corner politically. They have to attack the flotilla. Now, this new attack will be condemned in the eyes of the world, again, and Israel will go on out there and say, they had it coming, they had weapons, they were smuggling nukes, they were evil people, they're only doing this to make us look bad when we attack them. Okay, don't attack them. It's just cookies and candy and medical supplies. This is going to be another PR disaster for Israel, and they're bringing it on themselves, because they can't back down. We already know from the official Israeli documents that McClatchy News has published that this is not about Israel's security against the Palestinians. It's about starving the Palestinians into surrendering their own elected government and accepting Israeli proxy rule. And even though Hamas and Fatah have now formed a unity government, Israel can't stop the blockade because to do so means admitting they were wrong to have had the blockade in the first place. This is where arrogance and ego become very destructive of the national good. They're maintaining a starvation blockade whose original political purpose is no longer achievable. But they have to keep doing it because they can't admit that was the actual purpose and they can't be seen to back down. So, now, this brings us back to Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard is still in prison. Actually, he should have been put in front of a firing squad or electrocuted the way the Rosenbergs were for his crime here. And Israel is trying to get him out, although he's scheduled for release in a few years anyway. And they're trying to get him out, and they're saying, oh, his father died, he's got to get at the funeral. And they're basically just continuing this pressure for the United States to relieve Pollard. And what's really interesting, because in the article that we linked to, and I wouldn't have even bothered, except they had this quote. All right, this came from AFP, was the original corporate media site. Pollard, a former U.S. Navy analyst, passed thousands of secret documents about American spy activities in the Arab world to Israel between May 1984 and his arrest in November 1985. This is inaccurate at the least. AFP is trying to make it look like it's not really a big deal what was being passed to Israel. Oh, it's just about spy activities in the Arab world. That's not what Pollard stole. Pollard stole and passed to Israel were documents regarding America's nuclear deterrent. Israel turned around and gave them to the USSR in exchange for increased immigration quota. Pollard got the code word documents for decryption keys for secure communications for the nuclear missile submarine fleet. This allowed the Soviets to eavesdrop on everything America's nuclear deterrent was doing. Your parents' generation paid $5 trillion for that nuclear deterrent. And Pollard gave it away to Israel, who gave it to Russia, which is why he should be treated the way the Rosenbergs, who were involved in the transference of America's nuclear bomb plans to the Soviet Union, he deserves an execution. At the time of his arrest, Pollard had hundreds of classified documents in his home. And because of what he did, the Soviets knew where every single American missile submarine was located, completely bypassing the whole idea of this nuclear deterrent. You can't attack us because you don't know where the return missiles are coming from. So every time I see anybody in the American government saying, oh yeah, Pollard suffered enough, we got to let him go, they're betraying the United States of America for the benefit of a foreign power. Vote him out of office next election. We'll be back tomorrow here at the Rents Radio Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical. And aloha, America.